Today in Romans chapter 5 in verses 12 to 21, Paul makes a comparison between Adam, the first man, and Christ. And so there's this analogy, this contrast between the two, and how death spread to all because all have sinned, but it started with coming through one man. That is, death came through Adam and through sin. And then he begins to contrast the difference between Adam and Jesus, that just as death and sin came through one man, salvation and righteousness come through one man, that is, through Christ. And in verse 18, Paul puts it this way: Therefore, just as one man's trespass led to condemnation for all, so one man's act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all. Part of why I picked the verses yesterday and today from Romans 5:10 and 5:18 is because often you hear Christian teachers and preachers focus so much on how Paul talks about the death of Christ that we can miss this emphasis on life. And again, so one man's act of righteousness, that is Jesus' death on the cross, leads to justification, just as if I had never sinned when I am covered by the blood of Christ, and life for all. And Paul goes on to say, for just as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous. And I'm going to read another verse. But law came in with the result that the trespass multiplied, that the law of Moses, rather than making people holy, Paul's argument is it just reveals the lack of holiness in people because nobody fulfills the law. But where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. And one of the things that we hear from Paul in all of his writings is the sufficiency and power of God's grace, and how that grace is greater, as a song says, than all of my sin. And I pray today that if there's something that you've been wrestling with, a sin in your life, something you struggle with, it can be a sin of commission, it can be a sin you've committed, or it could be a sin of omission, something that you feel God really wanted you to do and you failed to take action. You didn't do it. There was a need and you didn't meet it. Whether it's a sin of commission or omission, I encourage you to just confess it and leave it to God, and know that in Jesus Christ there is righteousness that leads to justification in life for you and for me.